Midlife isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. In this week's episode of Reproductive Rebel, I'm joined once again by Mary Beth O'Connor for a powerful conversation about rewriting the script during perimenopause. We're talking career pivots, purpose shifts, and trusting your timing in a world that tells you're too late. If you're standing at a crossroads, particularly if you're on the perimenopausal path, this episode is your sign. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an East Asian medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women to live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering holistic solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I am thrilled to once again be joined by Mary Beth O'Connor. Welcome back to the show, Mary Beth.
Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you again.
So if you did not catch episode 24, Mary Beth and I had a really beautiful conversation about her life's journey and her life's work. And I would highly recommend you check it out. Again, episode 24, if you did not catch it before. But as we were doing our pre-screening call, there were several things that came up as, oh, wow, we could talk about a lot of cool stuff. And so I had her come back to the show, and I'm so grateful that she accepted the invitation, because one of the things that came up in our conversation is we were talking about changing careers, and particularly with an eye towards changing careers in midlife. I get this question all the time, and I feel a lot of women who are in their perimenopausal journey start questioning their purpose, their life's trajectory. Does my career still feel aligned? You know, all of these kinds of things. Maybe I want to go back and finish the degree that I didn't finish because I got pregnant while I was in school, and, fill in the blank. So when Mary Beth was talking about this part of her journey, I was like, oh, this would be such an amazing conversation. So let's start with just a little overview of who you are and what you do for people who didn't catch episode 24.
Yeah, so I'm the author of a memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. And I talk there about the child abuse history, sexual assaults, domestic violence, how that interplayed with my meth addiction. But then also I talk a lot about my recovery, how the trauma recovery was just as important as the substance recovery for me to sort of be able to, reconnect to my authentic self and, become who I wanted to be and enjoy life. And part of that, as we'll talk about, is my professional progression from when I got sober at 32 to going to law school at 39 and becoming a judge when I was 53. And then now and I always emphasize early retirement. I'm an author of multiple different formats, and I do a lot of speaking and training. And so I've had a lot of professional changes in my 31 years of sobriety, and definitely very different decision points and different points of my life, which caused me to adjust my choices and to make some big changes and some smaller changes.
I love this. So the first one that stuck out to me is I went to law school at 39. So let's just start there, because this is where a lot of, at least in my experience with my clients, a lot of my clients start questioning, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And it's because in traditional Chinese medicine, or at least from my perspective as a practitioner, 35, we get extended the invitation of how are we going to pace and live our life. And if we honor that invitation and we start that self-evaluative process at that juncture, often we get a sense of what we want our new direction to be right around the time we hit 40, because women's bodies move in 7-year cycles and the next big cycle is at 42. So 39, it sounds very like hallmark and familiar to me in terms of my conversations with my clients. So let's talk about entry into law school at 39.
Yeah. So when I got sober at 32, I had a Berkeley degree and good grades, but like this horrible resume. And so I really had to sort of start where I was. And by 39, I had worked my way into middle management in a high tech company. I was basically supervisor, a manager of the customer service department. So, I mean, I was interacting with a lot of different departments. I was supervising staff, a lot of running procedures and all those kind of things, trainings. But what I did at that point was I looked at, well, what would be, as I had done since I got sober, what would be my next job? Because I always want to look one job ahead to make sure I'm getting the skills I need so that, whatever in 2 years or whatever it might be, I actually have the resume that will get me that right next step job. And I started thinking about that. And when I realized was I didn't want my boss's job or my boss's job. Like, so I'm not in the right place anymore, right? What was working for me and had been the right progression for a long time no longer was. And so then it was all about, well, then what do I want to do? And law school I'd actually tried to go to law school right out of college, but because of my addiction, I had to withdraw and give it back. And that had been on my radar. Although it was a big decision because now I'm not 22, I'm 39. I have a job. I'd have to give up income to go to school for several years. I actually would have to take on some debt. I wasn't eligible for financial aid because I was married and, had a retirement account and other things. So it was a big decision. But it was also that I felt like, you know what? At this point, at 39, I'm either going to do it or I need to admit I'm never going to do it. Like it's one or the other. Like it's time to make a permanent decision. Not that you couldn't go later, but really it felt like that point. Either make the commitment or say, okay, I'm not going to take that path. So then what is my path going to be? And so that's sort of how I was thinking about it. And that's when I decided to take the risk and, to take the admissions test and do all the spreadsheets about what my expenses would be and, and all those kind of things and get ready and then take the leap and start law school.
That's awesome. And it's a huge leap. And that is that crossroads that so many women find themselves at that particular juncture in life. And I deeply resonate with I don't want my boss's job. And part of why I made the changes that I did as well, because I'm like, no, this doesn't feel like an aligned path for me any longer.
Yeah.
So you went to law school and you became a lawyer. And did you feel like going into a completely new profession at that juncture in your life was an advantage, or do you feel like you had to work a little harder?
Well, I will say that for law school itself, I actually felt I had some advantages. The disadvantage was that I went to Berkeley Law School and I lived like 25 miles away. And during rush hour, that could actually be a major commute. And so I wasn't, young and could live a couple blocks off campus. So I had to deal with the commute. On the other hand, I was much more disciplined at that point. And also my life was calmer. I had a reliable, stable husband. I lived in my house and I was going to my house until beyond graduation. I wasn't moving. I wasn't trying to start new relationships with a partner, all that sort of emotional chaos that younger people go through. That was already resolved for me. And so it did allow me, I think, to focus more on school without a lot of the distractions that people have when they're younger. And so I felt that was definitely an advantage then. And then when I was looking for a law job, I ended up working in a very large law firm on doing business litigation. My business experience actually was an advantage, and I sold it when I was being interviewed, that I know how companies are organized. I know what the different departments do. I interacted with these different departments in my job as customer service manager. I know how to read a financial report. I know how to, read financial spreadsheets. I know how to do a lot of things. I have practical experience that the younger people didn't have. And so I try to use my experience to my advantage. And I will say, when I started working at that big law firm, one of the things I noticed was that they trusted me to do higher end work faster, not only because the work they gave me I did very well and I excelled, but also because I just had a broader perspective and I could interact with the client in a different way. So I had skills, and therefore I had their trust in a different way than younger people might.
Oh, that's awesome. Yes, but you also hold that more mature energy too.
Yes.
Like, I have life experience. I understand as a company what it is that you're looking for because I have that track record and that experience. Oh, that's so cool. So I love that because when I see perimenopausal women who are like on the fence, I had this conversation literally just the other day with somebody going, I, have a PhD, but this job that I'm doing does not light my fire the way that it used to. Some of it is the structure. Some of it is that I think that I'm just being called to do something different. And that leap is scary.
Yeah.
Because of income, because of stability, because it's kind of like that leap, and is the net going to appear?
Yes. And I mean, one of the things I did also think about was, what can I do with this degree? So, for example, most degrees do have flexibility in the type of work that you do. Like, there are a lot of different kinds of law, right? I mean, there are a lot of different kinds of law that actually the day-to-day work is very different. The type of people you're interacting with is very different. But also, you can use a law degree for business and other areas. And so a lot of times when women are thinking about their education, I suggest don't just think about, I need this degree for this job, but also it can be reassuring and take some of the risk away if you realize, but actually, even if I don't like that job once I do it, because you're never sure until you do it, this degree has value beyond that one specific job goal. This degree I can also use to get me jobs in these other areas. And for me, knowing that the law degree was versatile helped me accept the risk a little more easily than if I felt like this degree is only good for one thing. Because that's usually not going to be true. It's usually going to open up a lot of different doors.
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you look at what I have my bachelor's and my master's in, and then you look at what I'm doing now, it's like, well, it's funny how much those skills actually did translate. Although, if you were to look at the degrees hanging on the wall, it may not look like that at face value. But you're totally right that these degrees do have flexibility, that you can apply these skill sets and these knowledge bases in other places. So you were working for this big law firm with your law degree. You were working more in the business litigation side. And I get the impression from our conversation that, like working for any big company, there comes a burnout point.
Yeah. So when I took that job, I knew that big law is big money and big hours. Like, that's the deal, right? You sort of know that going in. And I was careful. I did choose a big law firm that was, for big law, a bit more reasonable about the hours than some of the other firms. At the same time, when I went there, I told my husband, I said, in my mind, this is a 2-year commitment, and then we'll see. Because I knew in those 2 years, I would get the resume value of the job. I would get a lot of skills, increase and those kind of things. And maybe I'll stay and maybe I won't. So I always left that door open. In my mind, I'm making a 2-year commitment, and then I'll decide what I want to do. I don't think I'll stay with big law probably, but we'll see. And I ended up staying for 4 years. And I did always think when I was there about, if I want to go, where would I go and what skills would I need? Because I will say, one of the things about working in big law is that you might not get as many opportunities, let's say, to be the attorney who's speaking at the hearing. Maybe you'd be more support. Now, again, they gave me some of those opportunities that they didn't give some of the other attorneys, but I made sure that I got, a deposition experience, that I argued motions, that I was the primary, that I had client interface, all the skills that I knew if I leave for a different kind of law or a smaller firm, these are the skills they're going to need me to have. So it's always thinking ahead to making sure, again, that your resume is going to match up to the job you might be looking for. And so I thought about it that way. And I did stay for 4 years. And I knew the hours were high. It really was more of I think the least hours I would work is maybe 55, but usually it was more like 60 to 70, pretty much every week, all the times, 7 days a week. And at some point, it really came to the point that I was giving up too much. For the salary was great, helped me pay off my law school debt really fast. I got good resume value and skills from the job. I got good references, but I was giving up too much of my life. But again, that was a difficult decision too, because leaving meant a salary cut, an hours cut, but an even bigger salary cut. But also, I'm a blue collar girl. My mother was a secretary. My stepfather worked at the steel mill. So for me to walk away from that kind of money was emotional. It was a big decision. Like if my family knew if I was walking away from that much money, they would die. Like they would not understand it. But I really had to say, can I make sufficient income enough and another job? I can. I never let my expenses get so high that I was what we call in Silicon Valley golden handcuffed, right? Where I had to stay at the job because my expenses meant I needed that income. I never let that happen. I was aware of that risk. And so it was about, yes, what I wanted was fewer hours, a decent income, challenging work, but that meant, at a smaller firm, could I get that? And so that's what I did. I went to a smaller firm, and then later I became an attorney for the government. I always continued to do higher end challenging work, which I needed, and my income was certainly more than sufficient. But it was an important decision point as well. Am I going to walk away from this kind of money? Because if I do, it's the kind of thing that you usually can't get back. And so I knew that it was a permanent decision. So I thought on about it, but in the end, for life balance purposes, I decided to leave. But I made sure that where I went was going to give me the things I needed most.
Did you find that you had any health struggles while you were working in the big law firm with all of the hours, and especially because of where you were in your life at the time?
I will say that attorneys, for example, because I do continually go ahead, they have double the addiction rate of the general population. I had a friend who was in my class when I started at the big law firm, and she developed chronic fatigue. I'm sure from a lot of the stress and strain. So there is a physical and emotional toll. I definitely saw people's behavior not be what I think they would have liked it to be, getting short with people, maybe being disrespectful. I remember saying to one of the other junior attorneys, I said, it's hard for them to be nice when they're billing 3,000 hours a year. Like at some point you're working so much that niceties like being polite can go out the window because people are under such a stress and a strain, and they don't have appropriate breaks. And they don't have any, even on vacation, they'll call you, right? I remember my phone ringing when I was on the beach with my nieces, because they had a question. The answer was in the file, by the way, but it was faster just to call me on the beach because, that's what they paid me for. So definitely I saw people have an emotional toll, a mental health toll sometimes, and even sometimes a physical toll.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you got a big quality of life change. It sounds like most of it was positive, although, yes, I completely witness you in that, my growing up experience, I think walking away from a big law firm type salary would have been a hard one for me to make as well, simply because of the humble beginnings I had as well. So I resonate with that. So you started working for a smaller law firm, but you ended up as a judge. So how did you end up getting there?
Yeah, so I went from the small law firm to working for the federal government as an attorney. I oversaw class actions. And so I will say part of the overwork is me. Like when I was at the big law firm, even for the lawyers in litigation, the hours that I worked were on like in the top 10 to 15%. So I was, I always worked extra. When I was at the government, one time I had worked more hours in 3 months than they said anybody they could ever remember. But it was still better than when I had been working in private. And it wasn't always. That was the difference. It was during, certain periods of time but it wasn't relentless the way it was in big law where it never stopped. So part of it was my internal drive to really do excellent work. And I was willing to put in the time to do that. But also, again, because I was a very good lawyer, I got tasked with doing complex cases, which required a lot of additional work. So, but still, it was a much better lifestyle balance to be working for the government than when I was working in private. I remember one time I had accrued so much comp time, credit time, that I took off the whole month of July, like once when I was with the government. So it was a better balance. It meant I had worked a lot, but I still got some of the hours back and it took off the month. But from there, when I was an attorney for the government, I saw other people becoming judges. So, becoming administrative law judges. So part of it is just, having an example around. It's like, I didn't even really know that job existed. And so seeing others do it caught my attention and made me look at it and think, well, maybe I can do that too. Maybe I should try. There's a whole process to getting that job. And so that's how I did it. I was a government lawyer for, let me think, about 6 years when I was appointed a judge. And so it was that stepping off point. So, sometimes when you take that next step, you don't know where it's going to lead because you don't know what opportunities will come to light or what, new ideas will come to you by seeing where did the people in front of me go? Or what is their next step? Maybe that's a good next step for me.
I love that because it kind of goes back to this whole, like, should I take the leap in the first place? Yeah. Right? And then the path can lead you to places that you have never imagined in the first place. But it's honoring that call, right? That curiosity, like, oh, what else could I do? Do I feel aligned with what I'm doing? Where could I take this journey next? And this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation, because I feel like a lot of women, where you were making those decisions, you were right in the heart of your perimenopausal journey. And a lot of people think that like perimenopause and menopause is literally the end. It's awful, but like it's because our culture narrates it like that. It's like, oh, well, your beauty's going to wither, your mind is going to go to pot, like you just can't do anything. And the beautiful part about the work that I do in traditional Chinese medicine is they actually look at this phase of your life as a second spring. You are coming into a new season of your life where you have intellectual gifts because, once you cross that threshold into your non-bleeding years, you're no longer having the emotional ups and downs with the same kind of fervor that you were having before, because your hormone pattern is different. There is a bit of a neurological rewiring that happens because all of those estrogen receptor sites in your brain, they start changing. So that's where some of the emotional up and down during that phase can come from. But I love your story because it just highlights the fact that this can be stepping into a new book, not just a new chapter, but a new book of what do I want my future to look like. And as I'm going through this journey, I haven't stepped into the end of my life. I've stepped into the beginning of where everything can go.
And now we will take a short break from our episode to share an offering that will take your healing to a whole new level. How would it feel to stress less, feel more spaciousness in your body, all while reducing physical symptoms? I can tell you from personal experience, it's one of the most empowering and freeing experiences one can have. Rebel Remembered is a year-long journey using goddess archetypes, body wisdom, and ancient modalities to bring a level of health to your body unlike anything else. As a Chinese medicine practitioner, it has always been clear to me that the emotional body is at the root of physical symptoms in the body. This program is truly holistic, addressing physical symptoms by exploring spiritual and emotional themes, much like this episode. This opportunity only opens once a year, so be sure to get on the waiting list for when enrollment opens this fall. The link is in the show notes. And now, back to the show.
It's true. I mean, Part of it for me too was I was so much more settled into myself at that point in my life. I really knew who I was better. I knew what I enjoyed doing better. I actually didn't feel the need for promotion. I remember when I had settled this big case, it was a really massive case, and they offered me another big case. And I thought, if they want me to do it, I'll do it, but I don't need it anymore. You know what I mean? I don't need to be the one who gets to lead the biggest case in the agency, right? But if you want me to do that because you think I have the skill set, I will do it. And I will do my best. And I've had a good track record. I'll probably do a damn good job, but I didn't feel that emotional need. And so it became more about really, what do I want to do? How do I want to spend, this next number of years professionally? And then eventually, as you know, I left, retired early, and I started a whole nother phase. And so it can be a time for us to be more in tune with what we really want and less sort of distracted by societal expectations that may have been part of our decision-making earlier.
I love that. Yes, because where I'm sitting in my early 40s now can definitely tell you that societal expectations shifted the course of my life a lot in the beginning, and I was much more susceptible to being influenced by other people's opinions. And as I've stepped into this phase of my life, and I am on that perimenopausal path, I'm in the early phases of it, but I'm there. And I can feel myself be like, no, I know who I am. And I'm going to be for some people and I'm not going to be for others. I always show up and do the best job possible. And the people who see that are going to be in my corner. And I am going to just work with what resonates with me. And it's nice because I feel like a lot of that trying to fit in stress goes away. And I loved what you had said about, well, I can take the case because I'm fully capable of doing it, but do I really need to? I don't know. That is such a powerful position to be in.
It's true. I just felt that release of energy. And it was partly getting my perfectionism under control, my impulse, to overwork, getting it under, I should say, better control. I mean, I'm retired now. I still struggle a bit with that overwork thing, but I was in a much better place. And yeah, it was nice to notice. And it was interesting for me to notice that I didn't need to be the one to get it, that, I didn't feel like I was competing anymore. I wasn't, not that I would ever have done anything negative to hurt someone else's chances or anything like that. There was I'm the one that they give this to, sort of an ego boost about it, which I didn't have anymore. It just didn't matter. But that wouldn't impact my ability or my commitment. I take the case, I'm making a commitment to you and to the client, and I will do my best work. It wasn't that. It was just I didn't have the emotional need anymore. And that was a very good place to be. Yeah. It felt much more calm, much more settled. I'll do it because you're asking me to do it. You're paying me money, and I know that I can handle this case, but I don't have that urge that, to be the shiniest object in the office. I didn't need to be that anymore.
Yeah. Well, like I said, that is one of the sovereignty aspects that comes with this phase of our life, which is so beautiful. And as you alluded just a second ago, you moved into yet another chapter after being a judge. So if you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so I always emphasize early retirement. I stopped work as a judge. I stopped working full time when I was 59, so a bit early. And part of that was some medical limits, but I can still do a lot of things. Just the full-time work wasn't working for me anymore. But it was also a time for me to say, okay, so what do I want my retirement life to look like? Because I don't want to, just sit around and watch television. I want to be productive. And what I realized was that it gave me an opportunity to do things in the recovery space that I hadn't been able to do when I was working. So, you worry about what you might say or how people might reflect on it or how it might interfere with your job. If you say, I shot meth for 15 years, was raped this many times or had this history or struggled with PTSD, you just don't know how people are going to react. And it's not relevant to what you're doing, so there's no reason for them to know. And I applaud the people who can be open in their employment situation. I never felt that I could. Like when I was a judge, I felt like it would be a distraction if my substance history came out. But now I'm going to be retired, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. And so I thought, I could tell my whole story for the first time. What would that look like? What role would I want myself to have? And so I joined the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery and the board for She Recovers. So I'm helping those organizations whose recovery ideology is consistent with the way I got recovery. I also wrote my book, my memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, which a third of that book is about recovery. I wanted the book to be useful, but also learning how to write a good memoir was actually an interesting intellectual exercise. There was that added benefit. I've had opinion pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times and others. Those are on my website, junkietoJudge.com. I do training, like I train lawyers and judges about substance use in the legal profession. I have workshops for different audience. For psychologists, I have one workshop. For humanists and free thinkers, I have a different recovery-focused workshop. I do keynotes like for recovery organizations. And then I do on my social media, I keep it focused around substance use, trauma, mental health, and recovery. And I post studies and, articles and my recovery thoughts. And so all of that. So what I thought was, okay, the recovery space seems like something I could create a new role for myself. But then what would the role be? What do I like doing? Well, I like speaking. I like writing. I like interacting. I like engaging. So I created a role in an area where I thought my personal story would be useful. But I also created a role where I mostly get to do things I enjoy. Do I have to answer emails and create spreadsheets? Yes, but it's a much smaller percentage of what I'm doing. But also this role, I can keep it part-time. I decide what speaking engagements I'll accept. I decide, when I'm going to work on a new opinion piece or whatever. So I kept my calendar in my control. So I really thought it through. What area, what skills, what's going to give me the part-time engagement that I want, the flexible schedule that I want. And that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing.
I love that. So you get to use your creativity and things that resonate with you in a completely new way.
Yes.
Taking that degree and reinventing the gifts that you're giving to the world in yet another way.
Yes. And I will say I use my judge title today. It's really an ear opener, right? And so I really thought about how can I have 31 years of sobriety. I'm on these boards. I'm a retired federal judge. That gives me a credibility that helps me educate and share information that people might not know. No, also, I will say I also keep current with the new studies that come out and the new ideas and everything, because I'm going to talk as if I'm an expert. I need to make sure my expertise is well-founded. So there's work. I read probably an hour a day in the field about, different science articles that come out or whatever. I read books, everything in the field to keep current. So I don't do it casually. I make sure that I know what I'm talking about, or I won't have an opinion if I don't have a well-founded opinion, right? So there's all of those things, but I enjoy these types of activities, but I also feel like I'm of use in a new way, like I'm using my personal history in a way that has value to my community, that I'm giving back and being of service in a way that I didn't really feel free to do when I was working.
I love this. So if you hear the way that she's talked about this entire process, this is the embodiment of that coming into second spring. You are starting a new season where things are budding and bursting forth from the soil and they're blooming, and you have an entirely essentially new ecosystem that you have created in your life, in the rhythm of the way you move through your life, being able to do things that make you feel alive and stimulated, and like you're participating in giving in the ways that you want to. And I just love this story, the progression of how you are sharing your gifts with the world, because I wanted to have this conversation so that women who are in that perimenopausal phase of their life and they're starting to look at, my career doesn't feel aligned, what I'm doing in my life, maybe my relationships, like how I'm moving through the world, like these things aren't serving me. So what's next? How do I go about doing that? And you laid that out so beautifully. Like, oh, I was doing this thing and I got curious about where my colleagues were going and how this, this set of skills could do this other thing. And now I've essentially built a reality for myself in this phase of my life that suits my interests and my needs. And I feel like I'm giving back, and these things fill my cup.
Yes. And I will say, I also did look ahead to this. So, for example, I joined the board for Life Reinvention Recovers when I was still a judge, because I could do that. My name was on their Facebook, on their website that I was on the board, but it's not the same thing as telling my story in detail. But also, I was sort of working on the book when I was a judge as a hobby, like a side project. So I was taking writing classes, and I was already starting to work on the book because I was thinking ahead to what would be my next phase. And so for me, it's always about that preparation as well, thinking about what am I going to need for the next role that I envisioned. So I didn't know I was going to retire at 59, but I knew eventually I was going to retire. And I was already thinking about what do I want my retirement to look like and what can I do now. And I'll also say the book writing in particular, as a hobby, as a side project, it was an enjoyable project for me, because when I was appointed a judge, I thought, could my story be of use? Like, I went from shooting that to judge. This is an unusual story. Can this be useful? And I thought about a memoir. And so then I hadn't actually read very much memoir. So I read a couple recovery memoirs, and I realized, oh my God, they're written like a novel. like I'm a great legal writer, but I don't have this skill set, right? And so for me, that meant I took writing classes, and I went to writers' conferences, and I was editing and in a critique of all of that. Even when it was just a hobby, when I was also a judge, that was intellectually stimulating to me, because I'm learning new skills and I'm interacting with other women in a new way as we're discussing our work and, what's working for us and not. And so the whole process I found stimulating. It wasn't just about the end result. It was like I enjoyed getting to the point, getting the preparation side was enjoyable to me as well. Not just the goal, but the actual process. It stimulated me.
I love that. That sounds actually a lot similar in my journey to what I'm doing now. Is I was working in a corporate job, and I knew that there was something else that I wanted to do. So what I was doing as like a side passion project, because it brought my heart joy, the more I learned, the more I wanted to do something with it. And it moved me in the direction of what it is that I'm doing now. And, even in my early 40s, I'm already looking ahead to retirement.
Yes.
What do I want that to look like? How does that chapter of my life going to feel? What kind of rhythm do I want? Do I see myself continuing to do work like I am right now? And I know that the answer to that is yes. I think it's just going to look different. It's going to have a little bit of a different rhythm. But I know that I'm doing something that feels good to me. It makes my heart and soul feel like I'm contributing something meaningful in the world. And the landscape is always changing. So there's always things to learn. And my intellectual Aquarian brain just loves, give me all of the data and information. I just love learning new things. So, there are ways that your life can continue to pour back into you and can fill your cup. And perimenopause is not the end. It is the beginning. It is a birthing. You are stepping into a new part of your life where, societal expectations are a little less of a governing factor, and other people's opinions. I just know that myself now and myself 10 years ago, I cared a lot more what other people thought. And at this point in my life, I'm for some people and I'm not for others, and that's okay. I'm totally cozy with that. And that comes with age. It's a really beautiful part of the aging process. And so, I was just really inspired by your story, both your recovery process, which we did talk a lot more about in episode 24, but also your career journey. And I just felt like it was a really powerful story that mirrors the early tendril stages that I see in my office a lot, where women come in and they're like, oh my goodness, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I sort of feel stuck. I feel like I need to move, but I also feel like in the midst of this big hormone transition that I'm having, that like my world is ending because everything feels different to me right now, because your body is undergoing a really big shift during that period of time. But energetically, it becomes a new beginning. And there was something that I was reading recently that I found very interesting. The way that they articulated it is, before you start your bleeding years, you have a much more even tempered hormonal expression, which means your emotional expression is a lot more closely emulating a male, meaning that they get a steady burst of testosterone, their hormones keep their emotional spectrum in a certain place. Women have a lot more of an up and down kind of emotional spectrum during their cycling years because their hormones move on a 28 to 30 day cycle. But once you stop bleeding, you go back to having a little more of that even tempered emotional experience because you're not moving with the lunar cycle and all of these other things. So do you feel that transition in your hormonal experience changed how you looked at your future?
I guess it's hard for me to separate that out from my growth, from my recovery, because again, I didn't get sober until 32, right? And so I will say the trauma recovery was a much longer and slower process than the substance recovery. So even by the time I started law school at 39, 7 years, 6.5 years later, I still was struggling with my anxiety from my trauma. And so it took a long time to work through that. But you are right that I do feel a calmness, just a lack of urgency in a certain way than I did when I was younger. And I think part of that is the aging process. And I think a lot of people talk about how after 50, they actually feel more settled, happier. When they do happiness studies, I think your happiness level actually goes up after 50. It doesn't go down, it goes up. And there's a lot of reasons for that because we're more settled into who we are. And like we both talked about, we're less concerned with what others think about us. It's not that means we go about, banging around like a, bull in a china shop, not caring. It's just that we live our lives the way that, and the way we want to live them, which mostly doesn't impact other people. And other people, their tangential opinions aren't that important. Like when I wrote my piece for the Wall Street Journal, there were a lot of comments and not all of them were, favorable to my opinion, which is fine. But I didn't have that depth of emotional response that I might have had when I was younger, that it would have bothered me that publicly people were saying mean things about me that a lot of which weren't even true. And so there is a certain settling in that happens once we pass, the midpoint or the 40s, especially, that it's a joyful place to be. I mean, my husband and I talk about this phase of our life. I'm 64 and he's 74. And we said, well, if it wasn't for that TikTok in the background, this is the best time of life we've ever had, and a lot of praise, right? And a lot of people feel that. I think women in particular, including because the women that have children, which I don't, but they tend to be the primary caregiver. And so once the kids are off to college and on their own life, that frees them up to actually have more time for themselves, more time for their interests, being less distracted by having so many balls that they're juggling. So there's a lot of positives for women in particular at those points in their life. I agree.
I love that. So if you were to leave our audience with one final thought about dreaming into their future in the later years of their life, what would that be?
I would just say, I published a book when I was 61 years old, my first book, right? I changed my life basically in my 60s. There is really no point at which the world isn't open for you to change. And the other thing I'll add to that is that, sometimes we can make a change like this, but mostly we can't. Mostly we do have to think ahead and plan ahead. But for me, it was always emotionally easier. Once I knew that I had a plan to move forward, even if it wasn't a plan that I could bring to fruition immediately, it always was emotionally a relief for me because I had a new goal. I had a new plan. I was implementing the plan. So it gave me a target. I didn't feel like I was floundering. I felt like, I can't get there in a week, but I can get there in the next 2 years or whatever it might be. And so part of it, I think, is maybe don't focus so much on the rush of making the change, focus more on setting the goal and then thinking about what the preparation time is going to be and doing that preparation and viewing that as part of your new life. You know, your new life is working toward this goal. That goal is going to be there. It's not always a tomorrow, you know. I know for me, I always wanted progress to happen quicker than it did. But once I was sort of working toward it in a practical way, that helped me feel like I'm on this new forward momentum roll. And it relieves some sense of unhappiness or of feeling stuck in wherever I was at the moment.
I love that. I love that. So if people want to connect with you, Mary Beth, how can they get a hold of you?
So my website, junkietojudge.com, has a messaging app, feature. So you can always message me with questions or speaking opportunities. My book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is on Amazon and all the usual sites, and bookstores have it or can get it. And I'm on social media. I'm on X, Twitter, at Mary Beth O _. I'm on Blue Sky, Mary Beth O'Connor, and I'm on LinkedIn. So those are ways. And again, I really narrow my social media to the areas that I talked about. But I try to make my social media feeds useful. I don't spend hours on Twitter arguing with people, but I try to provide information that hopefully will be useful.
I love that. Well, thank you again so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with our audience today.
Thanks for having me again. It was good to see you.
It was wonderful to see you too. And until next time, everybody.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist, Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.